Hello guys, welcome to Gamed. This is a 6-part series where we make a game a month and share our learnings with you all along the way. We go from coming up with an idea to developing, playtesting, polishing and releasing the game all in the duration of the month. I am Divya, a game designer, artist and an illustrator. And my co-conspirator in this project is my sister Charu, who is a game developer, designer and music creator. This month, we made the first game of the series, Mark. Mark is a game with a lonely ball bouncing from wall to wall, trying to find its way out. The initial idea started off with the thought of imagining a Superhot-like game in 2D, where time moves only when you move. Though, as we went through the process, we realized we might have to make some serious changes to that. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So, with this idea in mind, we set out to make our game. The process started with making a ball bounce around in a box. But how will the player control the ball? We knew we wanted to use a mouse. The first implementation we tried was to change the direction of the ball based on the amount of mouse movement the player did. Basically linearly interpolating between the distance moved by the mouse to the angle by which the player would rotate. So, you drag the mouse in one direction to rotate it clockwise and vice versa. Though, we ran into our first hurdle immediately. Since the player can be on both horizontal and vertical walls, we couldn't just use a single axis for movement. And since the player would be in all four directions, keeping one direction clockwise and the other anti-clockwise became a problem, since the controls felt reversed on opposite walls. So we decided to use the Y component of the mouse movement for the vertical walls and X component for the horizontal walls, and switch the direction of movement for rotation as the ball went from, say, left to right. Yes, player control in the bag, right? Well, what became clear from playing with these controls was that even though this made logical sense, having to move the mouse along different axes depending on where the ball was felt really clunky and unintuitive. It never really became clear to the player when and why they should move on which axis, and you could barely aim properly. So, we figured that rather than relative positioning of the mouse, maybe absolute positioning is the way to go. We needed to let the player directly aim to where they wanted to go using the mouse. So we wrote a script which made sure that the ball is aimed towards the mouse cursor. This was a relatively simple implementation, but turns out that it works much better and was way more intuitive than before. The only issue was you could easily just keep your cursor over the point where you wanted to reach and click, reducing the skill needed to aim to almost zero. We then removed the cursor, so even though the motion remained the same, since you can't see the cursor, you are left at the mercy of your ability to follow a straight line to aim the ball. After testing the game a bunch though and making levels, it became obvious that the fun and the challenge of the game wasn't really to predict where your ball will hit once you aim, but on deciding where you should be aiming the ball. So at the end, we decided to add the cursor back. In our first playtesting session, we came across one more adjustment that the controls needed. So we decided to limit the angle of the ball to 160 degrees. With this, our ball was zapping around the room just the way we wanted it to and was ready to have fun and explore these levels. How the player controls work is the most important part of the game feel. But there is no game feel if there is no game. And our game needs levels, so that's where we are headed next. Like we mentioned earlier, the idea of the game was to have the player move around in this room, getting control to aim the ball as soon as they hit the wall. And as the player is aiming, the time freezes, and then they can predict the path of the ball and the enemies. Our assumption was to give the players ample time to think and navigate through the levels. To try and understand how this mechanic would play out, we went through a lot of iterations. The first set of levels taught us a lot of things. How symmetric levels just aren't fun to play. How the level needs a clear path. How each failure needs to teach the player something valuable about how this world works, and just how crucial is being intentional with everything that we put or don't put in the level. Even with all the iteration, one thing that just wasn't working out was the prediction. We just weren't able to get the gameplay to work in a way where the prediction was fun and predictable. Then suddenly we had an idea to change the game completely and do a major overhaul. This made it so that the time would not stop when the player hit the wall. Well, with this in play, we decided to test out how this would impact the gameplay. To really give both a fair shot, we went and made 2 sets of 5 levels for each of the gameplay. After playtesting and a lot of discussion, we realized that though we were fascinated by the idea, the gameplay just feels much better if we don't stop the time. It started shaping up to be a weird platformer, so we just let the game fly in whatever direction it wanted, since forcing it to be something just wasn't working out. With this decision in mind, we started building levels. We took the first 5 levels and hashed out what we liked and didn't like about these levels, what story we wanted to tell in each level, how we wanted the difficulty to feel like. So for example, this puzzle in the first version of level 2, where we introduced the spike, taught the player to approach the key near the spike from an angle. But in the final version, we decided to first introduce the spikes using the simple bounce mechanic as it was in level 1. And then to make sure that the puzzle was understood by the player, we introduced a mirror version of it as the player reaches the end of the level. We also realized how multiple bounces mostly just felt random, and since the player lost control for a long period of time, it was hard to predict where the ball will land after multiple collisions. That made us mindful of how many bouncy surfaces were introduced in the level. And also, no parallel bouncy surfaces please. We realized how the spikes might be the worst enemy of the player, but apparently the best asset to the game designer. Where we didn't want the player to go, we put spikes. We made sure that the player just couldn't go to random places and was forced to come up with an interesting solution rather than just a random smashing about. Games like Celeste and Super Meat Boy became a great inspiration on how the levels needed to be structured. Every story needs a beginning, a middle, and an end. And a level always tells a story, or at least it should. Looking at other games as we were constructing our levels made sure that we always had a clear narrative and a structure to the levels. A really good talk to refer here is the GDC talk by Matt Thorson, who created the levels for Celeste. Link is in the description. Making a game has a lot of different parts, and while the player control and the level design was where most of our time went while creating Mark, the final layer of polish with sound, improved visuals, animation, and music took the game from this to this. In this whole process, we realized the biggest key was iteration. Iterate, iterate, iterate. Nothing in the process made sense to us in the first go. It felt wrong or misplaced. Nothing did what we wanted it to. The controls did not feel good, the levels were just not fun. But as we worked on it, chipped away at it bit by bit, it kept getting better. Each cycle of playtesting revealed new improvement directions. Even using each other as a playtester revealed a fresh perspective. The idea that this game started out with is not even a part of the final version. And that is okay. We can't plan and predict everything, but just understanding the gameplay and improving what it can be led to something more fun and interesting. The deadline of a month really helped us zone in on the important parts that would make this game exist, and we were not really hung up on one idea over the other. At the end of the day, we realized that things can get tough in between. Sometimes it might feel as if there is no way out, that your ideas are running dry, that there is not enough time to execute. But if you keep at it, it becomes better. And more than anything, you have something you're proud of making. And you leave with the feeling that you want to make more of it. We hope this made you want to make something fun and in the process, learn new things. We would love to hear your feedback on the game. The link for the game is in the description and it is free to play. Please feel free to leave your games in the comment so we can all play and learn from each other. And we'd be happy to answer any questions you might have, so leave them in the comments below. Hope you gained something from seeing our journey. If you liked this video and would like to see more of the series, like and subscribe. And we will be back here next month with another game and new learnings from the process. Hope to see you again next time.